And now I'm going to read to you from the first chapter of Guardians of the Willow, which is the 7th installment in the Kingdom of Florida book series. Ready? Kingdom of Florida, Guardians of the Willow. Written by Taylor Thomas Smythe. Illustrated by Taylor Thomas Smythe. Chapter 1. Safekeeping. The night was clear and the stars shone bright over the palace of Mangonia. Situated in the northeast corner of that far-off country, it was one of the most splendid sights to behold, even in the moonlight, where its soft stucco walls and magnificent arches radiated an air of importance, as a cool breeze rustled a few stout palm trees. The massive citadel sat a little higher than the rest of the nearby village and its earthen humble abodes, and every entrance and exit was flanked by skilled guards with sharpened scimitars. A figure moved down the village thoroughfare, clinging to the shadows. It was nearly midnight. The shadowed individual stopped to scan the streets for any onlookers before proceeding toward the palace's primary gates. A metallic necklace jangled around the figure's neck, before being tucked quickly under dark clothing, where its sound was muffled. The guards were startled as the figure emerged from the darkness. They clicked their heels at attention. Before them stood a young man around 20 years old. Oh, one of the guards sputtered. "I'm sorry, didn't realize that was you, Your Majesty." The young man continued confidently toward the open gate as the sentries lowered their weapons. The second guard chimed in. "A bit late for the ruler of Mangonia to be out wandering the city alone, isn't it, King Oliver?" With a slight nudge to adjust his round glasses, the young king nodded and continued into the palace without a word. While the pair of guards pondered his curious behavior, Oliver proceeded through the palace with purpose. His route and intent were clear until he arrived at a corridor off which several doorways diverged. The man stood scratching his head for a moment before continuing on down a candlelit hallway. A sudden creak from an old wooden door startled the man so that he let out a gasp. He turned to face a diminutive maid who carefully pulled the door shut behind her. "Didn't mean to scare you, Your Highness," she said with a nod. "Just checking on your grandmother." "How is she?" Oliver muttered, with little change in affect. The nurse shook her head. "It's not looking good, sir," she replied. "With luck, she'll make it through the night. You may want to say your goodbyes while you still can." Oliver nodded and proceeded to push the door inward. As he did, the necklace that hung over his chest slipped and dangled through the front of his garments, glinting in the firelight. "What a beautiful necklace," remarked the nurse as she stopped to admire it. "Ruby is my favorite of all the gems." Nervously, Oliver tucked the giant stone back under his shirt and entered the dim room. An assortment of votive candles in tiny strawberry glass cups lined the windowsill, and an arched alcove on the far wall. Directly ahead of Oliver was a simple bed, upon which an old woman lay, her eyes closed peacefully. "Coral," the young man whispered as he approached her. The woman's eyes fluttered open sluggishly. Her eyelids were a milky gray, the color faded from its usual vibrant hazel. "Oliver, my dear," she smiled. "Is that you?" He nodded hesitantly before replying, "Yes, grandmother. It's me, Oliver." Oliver knelt a bit so that their faces could be on the same level. The ailing woman strained a bit but eventually placed a gentle hand on her grandson's cheek. The old woman furrowed her brow. "Are you all right, Oliver?" Coral asked, barely above a whisper. "Of course," replied Oliver tersely. "Just happy to see you again." "This may be the last time we meet in this life," Coral managed with labored breaths. "And I just want you to know that I'm proud of you, my dear Oliver. When I'm gone, I know you'll continue to rule and lead with courage and grace." Oliver forced a smile. "I look forward to it, for I learned from the best." "Yes, dear," his grandmother replied. "You have your mother's spirit, Oliver." "And you'll share her fate," whispered Oliver. The gold chain dangled from his neck once more, causing the scarlet facets of the attached gemstone to catch a fiery glimmer from the candles. Coral's eyes grew wide as she watched the young man draw an object from within his garments, a small, sharp dagger. "You're not Oliver!" The old woman watched in horror as the young man raised the small blade. "No," replied the man. I'm someone far worse." Before Coral's very eyes, the figure of her grandson began to contort and shift into a billowing blur of darkness. Seconds later, a woman with long, oily hair and a feathery black dress stood over the grandmother's withering body. "Malvern," Coral said under her breath. "I should have done this long ago," the witch rasped. "Goodbye, old fool." Malvern raised the dagger with a malicious smile and plunged it downward, swift and sure.